On behalf of the New York Wine and Grape Foundation, we welcome you to New York Wines Online, Winegrowers, the Foundation of Sustainability with Esther Mobley. While we wait for everyone to get logged in, we would like to review a few logistical details. If you find yourself with streaming issues, please limit other internet users in your office or household. You may need to close all other open browsers, or you may also find it helpful to log out and log back in with Firefox or Chrome. We have two forms of communication for today's webinar, the chat and Q&A sections. The chat section is an informal way for you to communicate with other attendees. Please be sure to select all panelists and attendees in the drop-down To field, as it can default to panelists only. Additionally, we have the Q&A section. This is a way for you to ask questions of our on-screen panelists. Please be sure to enter any questions for the panelists into the separate Q&A section. We will do our best to get to all of your questions at the end of the session. Today's webinar is being recorded and streamed to Facebook Live and will be available to all registered attendees after the webinar. To begin today's webinar, I would like to introduce you to Esther Mobley. Esther is the wine critic at the San Francisco Chronicle. Since joining the paper in 2015, she has reported on all the movements of California's $40 billion wine industry, from wildfires to undocumented vineyard workers to climate change. Since 2018, she has published a weekly email newsletter called Drinking with Esther. Previously, Esther was an assistant editor at Wine Spectator magazine in New York, and she has worked as a harvest intern at wineries in Napa Valley and Mendoza, Argentina. Her work has been recognized by the Louis Roederer International Wine Writers Awards and other award programs for feature writing, criticism, and agriculture reporting. We look forward to having her here with us today to discuss this very important topic. Esther, I hand the mic to you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Welcome, everyone. We're very excited you're all joining us today. So we're here to talk about New York wine. I'm in California and I write about California wine, but as Rebecca mentioned, I used to live in New York and I love New York. And I have to say, I think that winemakers here in California and around the world have a lot to learn from what is happening in New York's wine industry right now. Your state, this state, New York, has an incredibly diverse wine industry with a very long, rich history. It's a really rare place that grows many different grape species successfully in a range of climates. It's got grapes that funnel into all ends of the market, from table grapes to grape juice to some of the world's most renowned fine wines. And I think right now is an especially interesting moment for the world to be looking to New York wine, because growers across the US and Europe right now are in the midst of reconsidering what types of grapes actually make sense for winemaking in all sorts of places as the effects of climate change intensify. So one term we're probably going to be using throughout this seminar is Vitis vinifera. That's the European wine grape species. Grapes like Riesling and Cabernet and Merlot and Pinot Noir are members of this species. A lot of places in the world are wondering whether Vitis vinifera will be able to thrive there forever, given its susceptibility to certain diseases and its vulnerability in certain types of climates. And New York is a place that already has a history of growing other types of grape varieties successfully alongside Vitis vinifera very successfully. So I think it's a moment where New York, that has a lot of kind of different aspects to its winemaking identity, can really be a model and an inspiration for people everywhere. People in France and Napa and Sonoma are going to be looking to what New York does. But even as New York continues to be this beacon for the rest of the wine world, it's also right now a turning point in New York State's own wine identity. New York is redefining its sensibilities about how it wants to operate as a wine region, what its industry is, and it's on the forefront of innovations when it comes to climate change and sustainability, the focus of our seminar here today. In fact, and we're going to hear a little bit more about this soon, the New York Wine and Grape Foundation is on the precipice of establishing its first sustainability certification, which will establish high standards for environmentally responsible farming and winemaking practices and incentivize more vintners to get serious about that. We're going to hear about that from Whitney Beeman. We're also going to taste some really delicious wines today. Some of us who are lucky enough to have the wines in front of us. Rebecca, can we get the map up maybe? The reason I want to show you the map, we're going to be tasting wines from a really amazing range of places within the state. So we're going to talk to Quao Amos of Gotham Winery, whose tasting room is located in Manhattan. You may have heard of it, but whose wine is coming to us from the Finger Lakes. We'll talk to Suzanne Hunt of Hunt Country Vineyards, a 7th generation family farm in the Finger Lakes that's on the cutting edge of sustainable technologies. We'll hear from Erwin and Norlia Kalmar of Four Maples in the Champlain Valley. They have the northernmost vineyard in the state. Who can talk to us about the challenges and the rewards of growing hybrid grapes in their cold climate. And then we're also going to get down to the Hudson River Valley, where we're going to hear from Steve Castles of Malaya Estate, who can provide a really comprehensive perspective for us on the state of wine growing throughout New York. So I think this map really shows exactly just how much of a range we're going to be getting. And I may have jumped the gun on revealing who all our illustrious panelists are, but can we get that slide up so we can see all their faces? Yeah, here we go. So we've got Quao Amos from Gotham Winery, Suzanne Hunt from Hunt Country Vineyards, Erwin and Norlia Kalmar from Four Maples, and Steve Castles from Malaya Estate. All right. So before we get into the panelists and their wines, I'm going to ask Whitney Beeman, who's the Sustainability Program Manager for the New York Wine and Grape Foundation, to tell us a little bit about the sustainability certification that is coming down the line and give us a sense of where New York is in its sustainability journey. So Whitney, over to you.
Thank you, Esther. And hello, everyone. I am thrilled to be here with everyone today. So the New York Wine and Grape Foundation launched their sustainability program for the first time this year, but this is just the continuation of a many decades long journey toward elevating sustainable wine growing in the state of New York. Central to this program is the development of a statewide sustainable wine growing certification. And the basis of this certification is our statewide code of sustainability called the Vine Balance Workbook. Over the past several months, a committed group of grape growers, winemakers, extension agents, and viticulture experts from across the state have come together to update Vine Balance to include topics that are important to our industry, such as climate resilience, ecosystem health, resource management, and social equity. Many of these growers are represented on the panel here today. In spring of 2022, a group of pilot growers from the Finger Lakes and beyond will use the updated Vine Balance Workbook to assess the sustainability of their vineyard operations as their first step on a path of continuous improvement to become certified sustainable wine growers. As you just heard and saw on the map, we have an enormous state with many different wine growing regions and many different grape varieties. So unity is essential to this program, and everyone has to be included and have an opportunity to start somewhere on the path toward continuous improvement and sustainable wine growing. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney. So we're gonna kick things off by chatting with Quao, and anyone who has the Gotham Riesling in front of them, feel free to pour yourself a little taste. I'm gonna do that. So Quao, Gotham Winery, the thing we really want to hear from you about is, we know sustainability is central to what you do, but you have this unique interface with consumers with your tasting room in New York City. Tell us where you feel like your customers are in their interest in sustainability. Is it something they're asking about Is it something you can get them to care about?
Hey, how's it going? Thank you for having me, and thank you to everybody who's joined the call and my other panelists. Sustainability, it's interesting. It's something that I think in terms of wine and wine consumers is still very new as concept. I think people understand sustainability when they think about it, they often think about, things that are very much more tangible in terms of what they hear in the news. So they're thinking often about pollution in terms of coal, right? And solar and those type of things. And they unfortunately don't always relate it to agriculture. And so it's something that is growing in terms of consumer awareness, but it's still at its infancy in many respects. And so we actually did a informal survey with a wine bar here in the city, and what we found was that there are 3 levels of wine experts, right? So level 1, level 2, and level 3. And what we found is that across different variables like price, drinkability, social ability. Social ability is really more like, is it a celebrity wine? Does it have a fancy bottle? Those type of things. And then lastly, impact, which would include sustainability. What you found is that for level 1 and level 2, obviously they're very price sensitive. And then as you move along, drinkability becomes more and more paramount. And impact is last. But then when you get to the last level, the most expert drinkers, sustainability impact actually moves up to number 2 on the list. And so what we're finding is that when people are more educated about wine and they're more involved in wine, sustainability, things that have to do with how the wine is sourced is very, very important to them. But they're not the majority of wine drinkers. And so the bulk of it really is with level 1 and level 2. So we still have to find ways to make sure that level 1 and level 2 consumers are informed in their buying choices and have impact as a higher level in terms of their decision making.
So how do you communicate it to them, what you're doing, and where does that messaging get to come across?
Well, I mean, it's something that you have to do in terms of education at the local level, right? At the retail level. Also, obviously, the winemakers, the vineyards, when people come to your vineyard and you're talking about it, but mostly as an industry, right? It has to be something that has to be talked about more and has to be promoted more. But I do think there is just generally, when we think about sustainability, and I think the quote unquote average buyer, again, there is that disconnect between agriculture and sustainability. And so, if you told most people that 15% of greenhouse gases come from, cattle, most people would be like, I had no idea, right? So it's still a general learning process, not necessarily germane to wine alone, but just in general about how we think about the food that we source and how that affects the environment.
There's a lot of buzzwords related to sustainability that consumers are latching onto these days: natural, organic, biodynamic, clean wine. Do you use any of those terms to describe what you do? Are they different from sustainable to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And sustainable, when I think about, I think if you did a Venn diagram, I think there is some crossover in some of these things. But to me, sustainability, I think when I think of sustainability, I think of how to achieve a positive economic outcome with having a neutral or positive effect on the environment. And economics is the study of scarce resources. So land is a scarce resource, air is a scarce resource, energy, water, these are scarce resources. So in other ways, is like, how do we utilize the scarce resources we have to produce something great, but not impact the environment? And so sustainability is different, because I think when people use organic and biodynamic, I think traditionally, even natural wine, they were more thinking about themselves. Like, I want to have something healthy, right? And to me, so I think those words have a lot to do with me, and sustainability has to do with us, right? It's societal. It's about what kind of world we want and what kind of world we want to leave. And so it's very, very different from those concepts. I think it's much more broad. Again, in a Venn diagram, you could have some crossover, but it's a much larger concept, and it's a broad thing that we all are affected by in many, many ways.
I love that. It's not about what you're putting into your body. It's about the overall impact you're having and thinking about that. So tell us some of the things you're proudest of that Gotham Winery is doing on the sustainability front.
So I think for us, we've always thought about, people we partner with, and making sure that our growers were small family farms that practice the right growing practices. But now what we've been able to do, luckily, and working in partnership with Susan, is to be able to take the growing aspect of it and kind of unite it with production, right? And so I think we're proud of taking the next step and kind of going full circle. So now not only can we source grapes that are grown sustainably, but now we can also have a facility where we can produce sustainably. And so I think that is what I'm most proud about. And I think also helping to kind of advance the dialogue around it is also something that we're very, very proud of, and something that is something we're thinking about a lot.
Well, let's taste your Riesling for whoever's got some. Do we have a tech sheet to bring up to give everyone some background? Yeah, so Qual, tell us about this wine. Where does it come from? Yeah.
So it comes from the western side of Seneca Lake. And it's sourced from a grower who also believes in sustainability and practices things like, recycling of vineyard waste, things like that, integrated pest management, cover crops, all those kind of things. But most importantly, it's a wine that kind of embodies what we kind of think about. So this one is called The Artist, and it's from our lifestyle series. And when you taste it, you'll get hints of a little bit of apple, but also some citrus. It's very refreshing. It fits perfectly with the concept of artistry, because again, this is something that's sourced sustainably, made sustainably, but also is a great wine and kind of reflects the artistry of growing, the unity, right? If you want to use that word, of not only how you grow, but how you produce and overall come with a great product of wine. And so that in itself is artistry.
And is it true there's no residual sugar in this wine?
No, it's completely dry. And it's, and so even though we partnered with Hun Country in terms of the wine we're producing, in terms of this wine, it's very different, right? This is a wine that's very much my concept and how I approach winemaking, in that, for at least in terms of Rieslings and whites, very dry, very citrusy, but also has a lot of fruit up front. But it's balanced throughout the body, both in the mid and back palate, and it's perfect for pairing. So you can drink by itself, but you can also pair, and so you can drink it any season, and it's a great wine.
I love New York Riesling, and I'm excited we've got two here today. But it's so delicious. It's so refreshing, as you said, the kind of bone dry leanness of it, and it's very floral. I mean, Riesling's always got that super punchy, big pop of aroma, and this one is definitely giving that off. That's great.
And one thing that's good about Riesling I love is that it's one of the wines that I feel like are one of the grapes that evolves very well in the bottle. And I think this wine is still moving around and it's still changing. I would love to try this in a year from now and see how it kind of evolves even more. So it's an exciting wine and it's our first wine that we've made from soup to nuts, that is kind of tie in the concept of sustainability. So it's awesome.
Okay, beginning to end, full product.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think we've always sourced sustainably, but now that we partnered with Hunt, now we can actually produce, and making sure, again, when we think about resources, right, and limited resources, how they're utilized, right?
So Qual, as you look forward, and what's the vintage on it?
This is a 2019.
2019. Qual, as you look forward, what do you hope for Gotham's future in terms of sustainability? Are there goals you have yet to realize related to sustainability that you are thinking about for the coming years?
Yeah, I think the goal is eventually to have all the wines we make, no matter where we source the grapes, whether we source from California, Oregon, or where we're sourcing from New York State, no matter what, to have all our wines produced sustainably in terms of, again, growing practices and also production. And so that our carbon footprint in terms of what we can measure will be effectively zero. And that's something we'll be very much proud of. Obviously, you can never be totally zero, but we're always conscious of how we're doing things and trying to be judicious about it. And that also goes into things like the bottle that we choose. We use a very light weight bottle with not too deep of a punt. And that's easily recyclable. Again, thinking about those type of things. And so going forward, if we can complete the circle for all the wines we make, I think that will be an accomplishment that we're very proud of.
Great, thank you. So, so Cúvee and Suzanne have a lot in common in that we're having Rieslings from both of them, and Cúvee's wine is made at Suzanne's winery. So it's fitting that we're going to transition to Suzanne Hunt now. So Suzanne, there's a few things I want to make sure we chat about. One is, well, you have a lot going on, but you've made a lot of investments in the last few years in your facility and making your winery itself as kind of state of the art as it can be to be ultra sustainable. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what some of the really important new technologies have been for you?
Sure. And thank you for that. And thanks, Cúvee, for that teeing me up. I think, one thing I just do want to say up front, though, is that we are a smaller family winery. And so we are making these investments. They're all investments that make business sense, that have reasonable paybacks. We're not scrapping things that still work and putting something new in because we have piles of money on hand. These are all steps that other wineries can also take. So I just want to say that up front. So maybe 10 years ago, we put in a little vertical axis wind turbine. Maybe 9-ish years ago, we put in geothermal heating and cooling for all of the buildings. They're all highly insulated. We've switched to LEDs, hundreds and hundreds of LEDs in all the different buildings. Maybe 6 years ago, we put in 350 solar panels to provide most of our energy, and worked closely with a bunch of other wineries to try and go solar as a group to show the state that we were serious about keeping oil and gas infrastructure out of wine country, and partnered with the National Solar Industry Association and ended up helping to convince our congressman to cross the aisle and extend federal solar and wind tax credits. So I think, so there's just a whole bunch of different things. Recently, no investment needed at all. We stopped using capsules on the bottles. So just to reduce waste. Turns out that they're literally just decorative. So it's a single-use plastic or foil that we no longer have to spend money on, and people don't have to delay their enjoyment of their wine by taking the capsule off anymore. So other investments, while we were shut down by the state for 3 months during the beginning of the pandemic, we put in new flooring produced by a company called Interface that's an incredible world leader in sustainability, and full circle, circular economy. The flooring is made out of recycled materials, and then it's fully recyclable at the end of its life. So it never goes to a landfill. So there's just a series of different things we've been doing on the investment side.
You're also the chair of the New York Wine and Grape Foundation Sustainability Advisory Committee, correct?
Right. Yes.
So we heard from Whitney earlier about the certification, but is there anything else you can add about why you got involved in that and what you're excited to see with the certification coming online?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to share the 1981 today, folks were asking me why did you pick a Riesling and why this wine? And one of the things that, Esther, you and I usually are talking about hybrids, and you started your comments off by saying, some people think we might not be able to grow Riesling in the future because of climate change. And I'm not willing to give up on Riesling yet. My parents just spent 40 years helping with their peers in the industry to make a name for Finger Lakes Rieslings. I'm not giving up on that. And it's really a team sport to try to pull society along to realize that we have to radically change how we conduct our businesses, how we power society, how we feed society. And so, a certification scheme is something that will take folks from wherever they are and then help them improve in all aspects of their business. And then it's in sustainability in a certification scheme like this is about continual improvement over time. It's not about being perfect at the start. So I think, and it's also a lot about sharing information and learning as a peer group. So I'm just so pleased. We've been wanting to do this for so long. And it took people like Whitney and others at New York Wine and Grape and some of our other peers in the industry to finally wrangle the funding and get it going.
Yeah, well, to be clear, I don't think Riesling will no longer be viable, but and I think New York's better positioned in the climate change area than a lot of other.
Hey, I mean, you might still be able to grow it, but with flood / drought / the flood drought cycle, and there are real, I don't want to sound doom and gloom, and I actually feel like I actually stopped reading the climate science because it's too discouraging. But there, the world doesn't change in smooth ways. There are real feedback loops, and there are points of no return in the climate system. If the permafrost melts, there's just a lot of things that could actually make it really hard to grow anything as farmers around the world. So I think that's why I keep pushing the sense of urgency, and I'm hoping that all the folks listening and all the folks out there that are tastemakers will help us try and engage the public in this issue.
Well, you have, a foot in both worlds in terms of vinifera and hybrid non-vinifera wines. And can you tell us when and why Hunt Country started experimenting with hybrid wines?
So my folks started the winery in 1981, and at the time when they took over the family farm, there was already some native grapes planted. They planted a whole bunch of hybrids at the time, mostly white, because everything in the 80s was white and light, and that was what was popular. The grape market gods were not friendly. They were planting in the 70s, and then like fresh young high school sweethearts out of college took over the family farm, and the grape market promptly crashed. So they had been growing Chardonnay and Riesling in the early days, as well as hybrids. And then when the market crashed and the big buyers that they had planted the grapes for disappeared, they started actually field grafting. So some of our Seyval grapes, some of our Vidal and Vignoles are grapes that my dad field grafted working with Cornell. So they figured out how to do field grafting in cool climate viticulture. So since the beginning, they've been working with hybrids. And then we're active. I'm on the board of the community board of the Cornell Agritech, the experiment station where they do the grape breeding program. And so they're continuing to come out with new and interesting hybrids.
Yeah, and when we've talked in the past, you've mentioned it's not about for you guys at least, and where you are in the Finger Lakes, it's not about choosing all vinifera or all hybrid. You're interested in a future where you're doing both. Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean, one thing is certain: the future is uncertain. And so, one of the conversations that I think is really helpful to have with folks is that the one thing we do know is that the weather is going to get more extreme and more unpredictable. And in order to try and help make our industry more viable, but also all of the agricultural landscape more resilient, we have to have more diversity. We've sort of kind of stamped out a lot of the diversity in our food system, and so celebrating a broader variety of grapes and a broader variety of styles of wine, I think it's more interesting to not have similar stuff all the time, but it's also more helpful when you have a crazy late frost, and then your later blooming varieties are okay, and then you have a massive flooding like we keep having, and your early ripening grapes are already in and safe. It just really helps us weather all these different storms.
Yeah. Well, let's taste the Riesling if anyone hasn't already, and can we get the text sheet up?
I asked the winemaking team what they wanted me to say about this, and they said, make sure they know we put a lot of love into it.
Oh, well, tell us, this is from your estate, is that right?
Yep, and so this is from our Rieslings, and the winemaker really loves to make an off-dry or semi-dry with our grapes. He really likes how the structural elements balance the fruit and balance the residual sugar in it.
Do you know the residual sugar offhand?
So it's 23 grams, and this wine actually spent 13 months on its gross lees. So yeah, a lot of mouthfeel.
A lot of texture. Yeah. Well, I think the sugar is a perfect foil to the acidity here, and it tastes really beautiful and balanced and bright and fresh. And it's different from Qua's, kind of different style. The slightly off dry versus the dry, but to me, both of the wines have that totally like signature Riesling, just savoriness and super potent aromas. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really nice. You know, I grew up on the farm, grew up here, and then lived overseas and lived in different parts of the country and traveled, and finally in the last 10 years, people don't hear that my family has a vineyard and ask me where in California I live. So finally, these wines are starting to finally break through.
So what Riesling, I mean, Riesling is such a kind of signature of New York, well, of the Finger Lakes, I should say. What do you think it is about Riesling that does so well for you guys, for your region, Suzanne?
I want to invite everyone to comment on that, because I will take the label of sustainability specialist, but I would never claim to be the most knowledgeable Riesling expert on this panel. But I mean, the lake picture here is a perfect introduction. You know, part of why the grape boom started in the 1800s around Cúvee Lake was because of the beautiful airflow patterns, because of the climate, because of the soils, the rocky soils that we have, and the cool nights in the summer and the warm days usually that help develop all those lovely aromatics, and then also that lovely acid backbone. So I just think it's the beautiful climate that we have at the moment, and in our terroir.
And I'll pose the same question I posed to Quao, but what is next at Hunt Country in terms of sustainability? What are the things you're looking to implement that you haven't implemented yet?
So thank you for asking that. We just joined the International Wineries for Climate Action group. So we've been working really hard on our soil carbon out in the vineyards. You know, our soils are the biggest sink for carbon in the world, bigger than all of the forests and biomass and atmosphere combined. So we are partnering with our local soil and water department. We're adding literally tons and tons of compost, and we're experimenting with biochar, working with colleges and universities in the region to share what we're learning. So hopefully learning a lot more about how to balance your soil health and soil carbon levels, organic levels, with what you're trying to achieve in the wine. With the International Wineries for Climate Action, we're going to be going through a super rigorous process to account for all of our greenhouse gas implications of everything we do, so we can figure out where we can still improve. So we've essentially eliminated fossil fuels for all heating, cooling, and power. So now we're looking at like, what's the climate impact of our packaging? What's the climate impact of all of these things that are outside of our direct control, but that we can team up with other industry participants to work with, and some of the huge wineries like Jackson Family and Torres, to be able to go to the glass producers and work with them and figure out how they can reduce their impact. And maybe I can use my other hat as policy director at a big infrastructure finance group to figure out how we can finance some of these like new ways of powering these industries that provide all the glass we need and the cardboard and the labels. So trying to expand what we're doing kind of on the very micro scale to industry scale.
That's a big project. A lot of things to look at and whole industries to kind of examine. Wow.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time. I mean, for my whole career, everyone was sort of just focused on energy, and it was kind of oil and gas guys and you know, the fossil fuel industry sort of obfuscating the science, and suddenly the world is realizing like, oh my gosh, like we're up against a wall, it's time to act, and everyone's trying to figure out exactly how to do that, and they're realizing that it has to be every sector. Like we have to rapidly reduce emissions from every sector. So it's a really exciting time to be working on this. And I think the world's also realized that agriculture can be a huge part of the solution. So it's never dull. And luckily we have good wine to drink.
Yes, yes. Well, on that note, let's move north to the Champlain Valley and to Four Maples Winery. And we're going to talk now to Erwin and Norlia. So you all have the northernmost vineyard in the state. Wow, that's a cool distinction. You have a really interesting story of your journey in terms of figuring out how, what to plant and what type of winery Four Maples was going to be, starting in 2008, correct?
Yes, yes.
So tell what happened.
Okay, what happened? I came to America to work, and my dream was to have a vineyard and eventually go back to Switzerland and either purchase a vineyard or plant some Gamay or Pinot Noir. But this did not happen. We found a dream land here in Champlain, New York, and so I wanted to investigate if we can grow a Pinot Noir and Gamay or the Vinifera's, and we went to actually the Finger Lakes to a nursery, Hamburg grafted grapevines, and we talked to Mr. Hamburg, and he advised us, and he's cultivating market and all the Vinifera's and Pinot Noir, etc. So we also were lucky to meet with Kevin Jungerman and visit the Wilkesboro test vineyard, and we got also advisors there, and we finally decided to make our first purchase of different wines, hybrids and Vinifera. So we had purchased Pinot Noir and Riesling, but they had to be grafted. They were not on their own root. And then we also purchased the market and Frontenac Red, which could be on their own root and developed to resist diseases, etc. So anyway, we started with this small plot of 1,100 vines, and soon we realized that it's not easy to grow vinifera. We had to, since they were grafted, we have to cover them winter time and then uncover them springtime. It's labor intensive, lots of energy, and 2014, late frost, all the little buds of the Pinot Noir, just froze, burned, died. So we had no yield at all, and this was the first year we wanted to eventually make a little harvest after planting them in 2010. So this did not happen, so we basically decided to pull out all the viniferas we had and continue with the market that became basically the signature grape of our region. We fought for this AVA, the smallest and the last wine region of New York State. So we are now a few vineyards that grow, I think, successfully a market with maybe less energy than the Pinot Noir or Viniferas. Doesn't mean that later on we might not retry again. The climate, yes, is evolving, but if I want to plant a vinifera, it will be on its own route, or I don't want to basically cover them winter time. Like it's a waste of energy, lots of labor intensive, and I think less energy put into the cultivation is also part of the sustainability. Because for all this to cover the vines, etc., you need to use a tractor with special equipment. So you use diesel. So we try to minimize all that. So that's what I have to say about the vines that we planted. So for now, we concentrate on those hybrids, or we call them like Nordic vines. We actually planted a new variety of white, Itasca, this year. So we'll see in a few years how it behaves, what kind of wine it gives. But as far as planting and watering, it was a dry season, and they took off like very easy. So I guess we have a good terroir for the market, and this newly planted Itasca that I was surprised, just 2 weeks of watering, and then leaves already, and didn't water them after that. So was as for the market, I watered like for about a month, and that's it for experience. Actually, we have a very short experience, but learning every year and every day.
So the Marquette, the hybrid, the French American hybrid variety uses a lot less water than the vinifera like Pinot Noir and Gamay. And what have been the other big advantages you've found? Disease resistance, pest issues? Are they?
Yes, they are actually resistant to phylloxera and other bugs and other diseases. So we have less spraying to do also. And well, I'm trying to every year minimize the spraying. So this is also an advantage I see. And I said, winter time, no need to cover them. They are on their own route, and they seem to do fine. So we're learning how to cultivate them, but they seem to be quite easy to cultivate. Abundance of grape. So we try now to improve the quality to minimize really the yield. Because if you let it go, it's very vigorous and gives lots of grape. So yes, that's it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a much more sustainable way to cultivate grapes in your particular climate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so, and
Well, it seems the climate here is a little bit different, and there's the winters are very long up here, and up to March sometimes we still see snow, and that doesn't affect the vines that we grow here, and it's one of kind of the best situation that we have, because we do not really we do prune them in winter, and then by springtime they just come alive again, and it starts again, and it's wonderful.
Well, let's taste the wine, the Marquette. So Erwin, last week you described Marquette as kind of Pinot Noir-like, and tasting this wine, I completely agree. But tell us a little. Tell us a little bit about the wine. This is grown at your estate property.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I'm not the best person to describe the wine. I'm always saying I'm making the wine for you to enjoy. So hopefully you will like it. Some people think that we are drinking lots of wine. It's not true. Actually, we like to share and invite people, and they are the ones that will tell us what they think about the wine. But as far as this market, it's a blend of market and Frontenac red. We found out that the market alone is maybe not too deep in its characteristic. The Frontenac gives some kind of additional acidity, freshness, but not too much. So we have a blend of 25 Frontenac, 75 market. It's dry. Residual sugar is around 4 for this 4 gram. As I said, resemble a Pinot Noir.
I think so.
Mhm.
I think it's I think it's a very beautiful wine. Really, I mean, to me, it's got the kind of red fruit and earthy tones that I would associate with a Pinot Noir. Maybe a little more heft to it than some Pinots.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're getting someone who comes in, so but it brings me to my next question, which is how are you finding customers perceive hybrid wines? Are they, is there a kind of stigma to overcome in the marketing of the wines?
Uh,
Yes and no, I think.
Yes and no, actually, we experienced last year is the first year that we really started selling our wine, and we attended several markets, farmers market. And yes, we had the question, oh, do you have a Chardonnay? Do you have a Moscato, etc.? No, we have Nordic wines, and no. I always say if they want to compare that we have a Burgundy style red, but I try to limit myself to this. Yes, the market is the closest cousin of Pinot Noir, same with Frontenac Red, but we try to make sure that people will accept this wine as being from New York State. And now, since we developed or wanted this appellation, Champlain Valley of New York, we decided to have this market as signature grape for us, like Finger Lake, we have the Riesling. So we try to have the local people accept that, yes, there is vineyards here, and yes, there is grapes that are more or less native from here. So stop talking about Cabernet, etc. But yes, they know that California has plenty, and the Finger Lake also. Our region have vinifera, Cabernet Franc, etc. But for now, we don't have. So we want the people to accept our wines the way they are, and not try to, put a label like Cabernet or Pinot Noir, etc. But no.
Okay. And I think it needs a lot of, I think, public education also to accept the hybrids. When you say hybrid, sometimes I said it's not really a nice word, but then we said it's a Nordic grape. So, so we try to change the perception of what people think, because maybe hybrid car is better, but I don't know. Look, I mean, it's a lot of education, and people beginning to realize, and people are very open to taste other types of wine, and this is very encouraging for us.
Yeah, and sometimes I think, maybe it's a matter of talking less about the variety or the grape species and more about talking about the place. It's a Champlain Valley wine.
Yeah,
it's a Four Maples wine. Well, that brings us to our discussion with Steve. We don't have a wine to taste from him, but he has a wealth of information to share with us. So, Steve, you have written about New York State wines and have a kind of deep sense of the history of vinifera and hybrids, but you're also now embarking on a really interesting new project at Malaya Estate. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Okay, thank you. I guess kind of an overview of what we're trying to do at Malaya when it comes to a sustainability program. I mean, I think we've talked quite a bit about how the environment is changing quite a bit. I mean, basically we have hot, dry springs, hot, wet winters. We have like these long falls that then are stopped, like generally around Christmas. As a Christmas present, we get a polar vortex that goes down to zero and kills our plants. So these are things that did not happen a long time ago. So I think one thing we're trying to do, and I think most of my colleagues are trying to do, is design a sustainability program that's geared towards a moving target, because things keep changing. I mean, many of my family actually come from central New Jersey for Virginia and Florida, and our weather patterns are starting to look a lot more like that, as far as like, much more violent things, a lot more hurricanes, more floods, irregular frost patterns. So it's kind of working out that way. So I think the one thing I'll try and emphasize, what we're trying to do at Malaya, is that it's a moving target, and you have to have a multi-pronged approach to attack at this thing, because things are saying, and I think Suzanne said it earlier, like used to be, there was the fossil fuel people, and then there was like the energy efficiency people. Now there's different things you're trying to have to work in a much more collaborative manner and doing it that way. So what we're starting to do, and I'm fairly new at Malay, but I've been making wine for a very, very long, probably too long. But there was pterodactyls flying when I started making wine, but that's another story. But at Malay, we not only do we make Cabernet Franc and Riesling and Chardonnay, and just Chardonnay is a hybrid too. It's a hybrid of actually Pinot Noir and Cúvee. So basically, I mean, it's not an interspecific hybrid, but most of these things, I mean, most people don't know that like Cabernet Sauvignon, its father or mother is Cabernet Franc. You would think it'd be just the opposite. So they're all hybrids in the end. So
everything's
that's why
a hybrid. Yay!
Yeah. So,
we're all
yeah,
hybrids.
yeah, so, but I'm saying it's just kind of like weird that people say, okay, that's vinifera, so they're pure, and the other ones are not. There's like, it's that way, and that's more of an education thing. But what we're trying to do is, basically we're still doing the IPA program, but that is like that is the cellar, that's the floor, that's not the ceiling. We are looking at like trying to do like solar renewable things as far as like cooling and recycling bottles and all that kind of stuff. But it seemed like from this discussion here, we'll talk more about the grapes that we're growing. So in addition to the vinifera grapes we grow, we also grow like Regent and Vignoles and Noire. But the other thing that we're starting to grow more of is actually heritage grape varieties that were developed in the Hudson Valley and the North Shore of Boston, like in the 19th century. There was a person, Philip Wagner, who many of you probably don't know, but he had a big nursery in Maryland, and he got most of his grapes, learned his knowledge from France, and brought a lot of grapes over and hybrids. And I talked to him once when I was at Balmoral and he was there, and I kept saying, okay, what are the new hybrids, or what are the new grape varieties? And he said, there's so many old varieties that have not really been explored yet. You should need to not look forward, but look back, and then use the past to go to the future. Because what he was saying is like most of the grape varieties that were developed, like say in France and in the Hudson Valley, they were cut short as far as their evaluation time, because you had the Panic of 1893, you had the Spanish influenza, you had World War I, you had the Great Depression, you had World War II. So mostly after that point, people kept going forward and didn't evaluate them that way. So at Malaya, what we're doing is we're reevaluating some of these older varieties that were developed in the Hudson Valley, like Iona and Jefferson and Empire State and Bacchus. So we're growing more of those. So next year, if we have this thing, we will have wines for you that are made out of these grapes. So they're in the tanks now. So, and it's a small project. We only make like about 800 gallons in this area. So, but what we're trying to do is like find these varieties that were around and developed in the Hudson Valley. And then, make sure first, they're sustainable. They have fungus disease, no problems with that. They can roll the punches with whatever kind of environment is thrown at your way. But the most important thing is they have to be quality wines. They have to be wines that people are going to accept as real wine, not country wines, not fruit wines. So we're kind of doing it that way. The other thing that we're doing a bit more, and it happened quite a bit before I came to Malaya, is that we're doing a lot more breeding. We're doing a lot more not breeding. We're doing a lot more blending of vinifera wines with hybrid wines. So like we have a Papa Joe Red and a Papa Joe White, and basically what that is a blend of like Chardonnay and Céval and Vignoles. So same thing with like the Papa Joe Red. We have like it's Champlain and it's Cabernet Franc. So I think by planting and also growing the way they should be, various hybrids, you can like reduce your carbon footprint and the amount of chemicals that are put into those varieties. So by growing some more of those, when you backblend them into your vinifera wines, it can still be a Chardonnay, but can have other things in it that will actually reduce the amount of carbon footprint that you have in them. So I would say that's kind of what we're doing. So we're doing a lot more blending of different wines together to make blended wines and kind of doing it that way. So that's kind of what we're doing right now, and I'm excited to be at Malaya Vineyards. So I got to thank Barry Malaya and Bruce Tripp and Ed Evans that they put me on. So I'm kind of happy about that, and it'll all be good. So anyways, hope you can come down and visit. So that's all I got. So.
Well, thanks. That's so interesting. And oh, what's Suzanne showing us?
This is Bacchus.
Grapes in New York.
Grapes. There were hundreds of varieties in 1909 when Cornell published this book that people were growing all over the state. Where did you get your cuttings from, Steve?
I got them from the germplasm place that's in Geneva. So that's where I got them. And also too, after I propagated and grew, there's no nurseries that grow them. So, and actually I do some propagation of them. But after propagating them and putting them in the field, I then read the book to make sure that what they sent me, in fact, was that variety. One of them turns out it was not. There was a grape called Ulster, and it was whatever they sent me, it was not Ulster. But everything else, I verified that not only did I get certified cuttings, but when they grew up into be plants, I looked at them and they look what they are. Now, what's the thing about the Grapes in New York book and the book that I wrote, Grapes of the Hudson Valley, kind of a similar title, is it's organized very differently. The Grapes in New York is organized alphabetically. So Bacchus comes before Empire State and does it that way. But what we did in the book that I wrote, Grapes of the Hudson Valley, is I organized them by hybridizer. So Sable did a lot of like Chalois and Chancellor. So I looked at what the goals of each hybridizer was. So when you look at the Grapes of New York book that's in your hand right there, it does it alphabetically. But when I was reading the book, I noticed there's all these hybridizers that were in the Hudson Valley, and they were all within a 3-block area of Newburgh, New York. They all lived in Newburgh, New York. They all were Episcopals. They all went to the same church. And afterwards, they went and they talked about grapes. that's what they did. So it's kind of interesting. But you wouldn't have noticed if you
didn't.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They used to have fairs. Our local paper, you can read the paper online all the way back into the 1800s, and they would have fairs where people would bring their new grape variety that they had bred, and everyone would taste them and they would get all excited about all the new varieties. It was kind of like great fun.
Yeah, and it's really, they were leaders because actually the group in the Hudson Valley that developed these things like, Ricketts and Kaywood and Grant and Underhill, not only were they hybridizing grape varieties, they were hybridizing it, one, to make them more resilient, but also to be used as table grapes and wine grapes. They wanted like that triple threat thing of being able to like grow well, be productive, use for table grapes or for wine grapes. But they were also the leaders that set up the New York Horticultural Society in the 1820s, the Massachusetts Horticultural Society, which was like the leader when it came to societies, and they had their own societies in the Hudson Valley. So they were leaders, they were national leaders that set up, they were the forerunners of like setting the experiment stations that were done later on down the line. So, but they were national leaders in many respects. So we're trying to revive those grape varieties because I've grown them for like 20 years now, and they're good varieties. I mean, like this year we grew some Iona. Actually, I bought some Iona from a finger lakes grower. He said the only problem he had with Iona this year was that they had so many grapes that the end post snapped. So that's the kind of problem you want to have.
Yeah, I mean, with Bacchus in 1909, they said it was deemed worthy by its originator to bear the name of the god of wine. They said it was resistant to mildew and adaptable to a variety of soils.
It's indestructible. It is like we had a lot of production in that. So this year, we're actually in the cellar now, we have about, it will probably be called Heritage Red, but we've got 55 gallons of Bacchus. We've got 55 gallons of Jefferson. So we've got those. So, and what we're going to do is probably keep them as separate wines. With the winery, you can like taste what a Bacchus is and a Jefferson, and then integrate it and say, well, what do you think it compared to a Chardonnay or a Cabernet Franc or whatever? So that's kind of the whole idea of thinking of new things to do that way. So another thing that's kind of odd is that I've been getting a lot on my work. I've been getting a lot of calls, believe it or not, from California on like, how do you grow these things? Particularly like the French hybrids like Bourdain, Le Cornell. We've been growing a lot of those varieties, which we're making as varietal wines too, but I'm getting a lot of comments and questions about them from people in Napa and Sonoma and Oregon, because I mean, things are changing there probably more rapidly than they are changing here. So they are looking for other things. So this maybe will be one thing, again, not a panacea, not to supplant vinifera's, but really just like another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah. It sounds like that's kind of the message we've been hearing throughout. It doesn't have to be a one or the other thing. And I think the spirit of experimentation and wanting to try things out is so commendable. In California, for example, there's a lot of resistance to changing things and doing things differently. And so I think the attitude that growers and winemakers and customers, consumers in New York have is really important to watch. So we're nearing the end, and I want to make sure we set aside a few moments for questions from our attendees. So anyone who has something to ask, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. Let's address. Suzanne has penned an answer in this already, but Brent is asking, as a winery and vineyard just starting to explore sustainability, what would the panelists recommend as the top 3 sustainable actions I look into implementing from both an environmental and financial impact? Can someone weigh in on that?
I can offer. So my top 3, if I had to narrow it down, would be cultivar selection, soil health, and energy efficiency.
Concise, easy.
Yeah, I would just say, because, it's so hard to be, a farmer and a producer and a marketer and retail and wholesale, and then also become an expert in all aspects of sustainability. So definitely lean on some of these efforts that are underway, and don't try and do all the research yourself. And, on the energy side, look and see what energy efficiency audits are available. Look and see, if you're thinking about solar, it doesn't cost you anything to reach out to a handful of solar companies and have them give you a free estimate, and see what state programs are involved. So if you take it, kind of look and see what resources are there. Maybe the biggest bang for your buck is going to be a geothermal system, but your heating system is currently working fine. But one of your, you need to build a new building, and so you're going to focus on, making it a super green building. Some of this is also just doing it as it makes sense in kind of the evolution of your infrastructure and your viticulture.
Well, I have a question I'll pose to everyone. I think the word sustainability, we think a lot about the physical environment we're in, whether it's the building we're using or the land we're cultivating. But are there other aspects to sustainability that should be considered? Things related to labor and people, and do you all think about sustainability in ways that go beyond that physical plane?
I have something that I like to say. We have for now a small vineyard, but our philosophy is not to import grape from elsewhere, because as soon as you make the grape travel, well, you are not so sustainable. I mean, you use energy to carry those grapes, and well, this is why our philosophy. I'm not saying that we'll never import grape, but we try to grow our own and try to sell locally also, in order to minimize the footprint, especially the transport, if you can avoid this.
So just getting your cuttings from the general area from New York?
Not the cutting. I'm saying we will make wine with our own grapes and not import grape or juice from other regions. And also we want to develop this new AVA that we have, Champlain Valley of New York. So this is what I have to say about another aspect of sustainability.
Sure. Well, and I know that there's different business models represented among the panelists, like, wow, you buy grapes from a range of places. And how do you think about how that fits into your sustainability goals? Are there ways of offsetting transport costs that you think about?
Yeah, absolutely. You're always you have to minimize. I mean, grapes are heavy, right? And you have to think about things like where your bottling sources. So when we were originally started, we were doing things out in Cali a lot, right? And then you have to bottle it there and then ship it across the country. Then became, all right, it's probably better to bottle here in New York State. There are so many different things, and then obviously effects. And when you're thinking about emissions and all those various things, and now you have so many different innovations in terms of travel and communication. But One of the things you did touch upon was labor, and I do want to get back on that because I do think that's very important. I do, labor is a scarce resource. So kind of going back into, what sustainability is about. And I do think it's important that, when we think about people who are working on farms and labor on farms, and if you're in an environment that's not healthy or conducive to individuals' health, right, that can also impact, right? If you don't have a labor force, if you're in a place that has a lot of pesticides and, your labor force are having secondary issues such as cancers and things like that down the line, that also affects those who are willing to work in that industry. And so long term, having sustainable farming practices also, is also good for making sure that there is a continued viable labor source that's available to wineries to be able to produce wine. And that goes across from small wineries to, large conglomerates. And so I do think that is an important aspect of it all, and something that does get overlooked. Too often, people who work in the vineyards are not honored enough and aren't treated properly. And so I do think that is an important part of the puzzle that we need to talk about and think about as well, their health and the practices that we're using in growing and how that affects them.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what the word sustainability means, it has to be something that works for all parties involved in order to keep going, right? Yeah, well, thanks for offering that. Any other thoughts, parting words? Yeah, Whitney?
Sure. Yeah, another one that came to mind from the people aspect of sustainability is education and the importance of continuing education for our grape growers and for our teams at our wineries and for our community in general. And so one thing that the New York Wine and Grape Foundation is offering are soil health scholarships. We've partnered with the Cornell Soil Health Program to offer scholarships to this week-long intensive over the winter to help elevate our growers in that particular area of sustainability. So check out the New York Wine and Grape Foundation website for that.
Always more to learn. That's great. Well, great. I think we're right on time. And thank you so much to all of the panelists for your insights, for sharing your wines and your time. Thanks to all of you who attended. And Rebecca or Whitney, is there anything we should leave our audience with, resources or things to look for next?
Sure. We have NewYorkWines.com. I believe we have a couple of websites references for each of our panelists today in the chat, so keep those in mind. And I kind of just want to close with Quau's statement from the beginning of this panel, which is that sustainability is about the us and not the me. I like that.
Love it. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure, and I've learned a lot, and I hope the rest of you all have too. I'm gonna enjoy my afternoon glass of Marquette now.
Thank you, Esther.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks to all of you for attending, and to Esther, Whitney, Suzanne, Norlea, Erwin, Steve, Quau for a terrific session. As we close out this series, we look forward to sharing more exciting and educational sessions with you in the coming months. Please be sure to check the New York Wine and Grape Foundation website for upcoming events and information. And don't forget to visit buynewyorkwine.com to continue your tasting and exploration of all that the wines of New York have to offer. Thank you again to the terrific panel, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.